Good afternoon. If I could just ask the last remaining people to take their seats. And I'd like to welcome you to this high-level interactive dialogue entitled Making Fair Migration a Reality, Challenges and Opportunities. My name is Elizabeth Collett. I am the director of the Migration Policy Institute Europe, which is the European arm of the Migration Policy Institute. This all sounds quite straightforward. We are an independent, non-partisan think tank dedicated to the study of global migration worldwide. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here and to see the International Labour Office really digging down into some of the key issues related to labour migration, which is a key priority for our own institute. Migration is a key feature of the world of work, but also labour is a key feature of migration. From governments looking for migration to fill gaps in their own labour markets, and identifying the needs within those labour markets, for creating opportunities for those individuals who seek to move and find better opportunities overseas, and ensuring the protection of those people who choose to move. And finally, supporting the integration, not just of those who move expressly for the purposes of work, but for those who may migrate for other reasons and yet still need to find employment. Labour ministers are integrally involved in all aspects of the migration journey. While interior ministers focus on the entry and residence, the gateway into migration into a new country, ministers of employment are involved both before departure, identifying key skills and offering opportunities for migrants to recognize their qualifications that they can use abroad, but also after arrival and integrating migrants into the labor market. If interior ministers are responsible for day one in the migration process, employment ministers are responsible both for day 0 and day 2, 3, 4, and every other day after that. There's a reason why I was asked to come here today as the Migration Policy Institute. We have a long and healthy collaboration with the International Labour Office, and we are currently coming to the end of a 2-year study looking at the labour market integration of migrants in 6 European countries. Some of the key findings from that report, which will be launched next week with the International Labour Office, highlight some of the challenges that we will be talking about today. The first is that data is poor. Even within Europe, there tends to be a focus on the binary approach to the success or failure of labour migration. Do you have a job? Success. Do you not have a job? Failure. In reality, the situation is much more complex. What is the situation of migrants over time? Does the quality of the employment they have reflect the skills they present? And how can you realize the potential, not just initially on finding a job, but realize the potential over a full career for those who choose to move overseas? The second aspect is slightly more complex. We looked at how public employment agencies are adapted to dealing with a more diverse clientele across the labor market. And what we found was public employment agencies are really at the beginning of that process of thinking of migrants as an integral part of the labor market and an integral part of their clientele, adapting to diversity, adapting to foreign skills, thinking about the integration in the long term, and realizing the career potential of migrants is something that public employment agencies are still just beginning to get to grips of. Today's discussion is inspired by many of the same ideas and inspired by the Italian presidency of the European Union. It's broader than Europe, however, this discussion, and we are pleased to have representatives here from Cambodia, Panama, South Africa, as well as employers and trade union representatives. So one of the key questions we want to look at today is how to establish closer cooperation and policy coherence between different aspects of this very, very complex topic. I want to ask each of the panelists first to reflect very briefly in just 2 or 3 minutes their experiences of cooperation, either at national or regional level, to promote greater coherence and better outcomes for migrants. And how do you align interests that might differ enormously across those various actors within that? And to begin, I would like to ask the Director General, Guy Ryder, to offer his thoughts.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. Hello, everybody. Great to see so many people in the room at lunchtime for this very important debate. And I want to thank all of our panelists, this very distinguished panel, for being with us. Let me just start the ball rolling with really 2 minutes of reflections about where the ILO finds itself in relation to the issues we'll be discussing today. Well, It's axiomatic that the ILO has responsibility of migration. That comes from our mandate, that comes from our constitution, and I think it is clear that our interest is most particularly to ensure that migration takes place not only on an orderly basis, but on a basis which protects the rights of the people involved, on a basis which contributes to and does not detract from our decent work agenda. I think we're faced with a major, I could call it a paradox, but certainly a problem. We see every day from the dynamics of the globalized economy that the economic case for migration is stronger and stronger and stronger for different reasons, to do with demographics, to do with differential levels of development, of employment opportunities, their distribution. But as the economic business case, the development case for migration becomes stronger, it seems that our political capacity to deal and to manage migration becomes weaker. It is regrettable, but I think we all have to acknowledge that any policy debate on migration now has to deal, at least in many of our countries, Minister, with very difficult attitudes towards migration. I tend to say that migration issues have become toxic issues in many of our political arena. So the first thing I think that we face the challenge of doing is to ensure that the case for migration is made on the basis of facts and evidence and not of prejudices and of fears. I think we all share in that responsibility. I think also migration requires of us, and the issue of partnership has been raised. This is a quintessentially international labour issue. What could be more international than international migration for jobs? We do need an international response to this international phenomenon. I think it is fair to say that the multilateral system has struggled to find the types of responses which are commensurate with the nature and the magnitude of the challenge before us. Over the last year, the ILO has chaired the Global Migration Group, the multilateral systems coordinating body, and I've had to observe the extent to which multilateral responses to migration issues are fragmented, lack coordination and lack, I think, the strength that they require. We need to bring, I think, a renewed sense of common responsibility to addressing migration issues. The word solidarity comes to my mind, and let me, speaking with the Minister of Labour of Italy sitting on my right, just evoke the situation that Italy has had to face. Italy has been extraordinary, and Italians have been extraordinary in demonstrating their solidarity in the face of some difficult issues arising from migration. I wonder if solidarity with Italy, to make this a truly international, regional international response to those difficult circumstances, has been at the level that we would like to see. I don't think it has. So the ILO, and I put on the agenda of the ILO conference last year an agenda for fair migration. I've integrated that agenda into my proposals as one of the priorities for future action by the ILO. We do believe that we have a heavy responsibility. We do want to create partnerships. The most natural partnership in the ILO is that between governments, employers and workers. That tripartite partnership is vital. We need partnerships between countries of origin and the countries receiving migrants. We need partnership between the different parts of the multilateral system. And all of that needs to be glued together by this sense of responsibility and solidarity. The fact of the matter is migrants make a massive contribution to the success of our societies. That contribution is insufficiently recognized. Problems associated with migration become unduly magnified. We have to rectify that and bring the values of this organization to the task of protecting the rights of migrant workers and their families, and ensuring that the contribution they do make is managed in a manner which can enable migration to evolve in a satisfactory way in the future. Easily said, much more difficult to do, and I think it would be good to listen to the people who are on the front lines of this issue, my fellow panelists, who are dealing with these issues in a very concrete way. So I'll leave it at that and hand it over.
I'm clearly going to have an unmuting problem for the next hour and a half. Thank you very much for setting such an extraordinary mandate, I think, for the rest of our panelists to take up. Mr. Giuliano Poletti is the Minister for Labour and Social Policy in Italy, and the Italian presidency of the European Union has really put migration front and centre in terms of its own priorities. And so I would just like to ask you the question, why is this so important for Italy right now? And how do you envisage future cooperation on these issues emerging from an Italian perspective? Thank you.
For Italy, for my country, this is obviously a very important topic. It is, however, an important topic also for all of Europe. Italy is an important part of all the measures that are undertaken at the European level with other international partners. Now, we know very well that migration has been changing. It has been changing profoundly. The reason for migration has been changing. There are economic problems, obviously, that goes without saying. There are demographic issues.
Ci sono le guerre, ci sono i conflitti, ci sono ragioni diverse che portano cittadini a migrare, e ognuna di queste ragioni ha bisogno di una sua specifica comprensione, e questo è il primo problema che abbiamo di fronte. Dobbiamo essere capaci di comprendere le ragioni per le quali un cittadino abbandona la propria patria e decide di arrivare in un altro luogo, e questa è la prima grande difficoltà di questo momento. La seconda grande tematica che noi abbiamo di fronte è quella della integrazione, cioè la possibilità di trovare azioni che consentano a questi cittadini di vivere nella pienezza dei loro diritti come esseri umani la loro condizione. Non è per nulla semplice farlo, in particolare quando ci occupiamo del tema del lavoro, e ci occupiamo del tema del lavoro dentro una crisi che ha bruciato posti di lavoro, ha ridotto il numero delle opportunità di lavoro, perché per una certa fase in paesi come l'Italia l'immigrazione era un fatto in qualche misura riconosciuto come utile alle dinamiche dell'economia e della società. Oggi questo elemento è molto più discusso, è molto più reso discutibile dalle condizioni di problematicità che ci sono. E la nostra scelta, anche come presidenza del semestre dell'Europa, è stata quella di discutere con i nostri partner europei quali politiche di integrazione a partire dal lavoro e a partire da una prima assunzione che abbiamo fatto come paesi in Europa, e cioè quella del libero movimento dei cittadini e dei lavoratori, perché questo è già un primo presupposto per ognuna delle nostre comunità per considerare la mobilità del lavoro e la mobilità delle persone come un diritto, e se riusciamo ad assumerlo come diritto per i cittadini europei possiamo più agevolmente accettare o pensare a questo dato come dato che riguardi i cittadini di tutto il mondo, e quindi chi fa questa scelta o è portato a fare questa scelta o è nella condizione di fare questa scelta per una condizione di necessità. E quindi noi cerchiamo di fare in modo che si colgano gli elementi di vantaggio che possono derivare da questa condizione per i paesi di partenza, per i paesi che ospitano questi cittadini e per le persone in quanto tali. Questo è lo sforzo che bisogna fare, e serve un dialogo importante che abbia tutte queste componenti. Insieme a questo quindi noi abbiamo scelto in dimensione europea, a livello nazionale, di lavorare a costruire questo dialogo, cercando di avere una strumentazione. La prima risposta che abbiamo dato, ad esempio a livello europeo, è stato quello di avere un unico fondo europeo per l'asilo, la migrazione e l'integrazione. Quindi non abbiamo separato le diverse fasi, le diverse situazioni, l'accoglienza, la gestione dell'asilo, il tema della inclusione e della integrazione. Abbiamo scelto a livello europeo di avere un'unica strumentazione economica che supporta tutti questi elementi, perché la nostra convinzione è fondamentalmente questa: la gestione di una buona relazione, di una buona governo e costruzione delle condizioni positive per la gestione delle migrazioni è quella di lavorare avendo una idea di integrazione, una idea di relazione, e quindi non separare le diverse fasi, ma immaginare che ad ogni fase ci sia poi una connessione, un collegamento per le fasi successive. Quindi questo per noi è un po' lo schema, diciamo la risposta. Quali sono i meccanismi attraverso i quali si può migliorare la qualità della vita di queste persone e un buon contesto locale, un buon contesto delle comunità. Noi pensiamo che è solo dalla integrazione dell'azione dei diversi soggetti che si può produrre questo tipo di risultato, e quindi sia come Presidenza europea sia come Paese, come Italia, abbiamo fatto questa scelta e noi pensiamo che questo sia un interessante contesto nel quale si può lavorare per migliorare nel tempo, a partire appunto, questo è il tema da cui noi ci siamo mossi, della comprensione delle ragioni per le quali una persona decide di migrare, di trasferirsi, che sono molto diverse e che portano queste persone in condizione molto diversa nella relazione con i contesti dove vanno ad insediarsi.
Thank you very much, especially for elaborating also on the situation of free movement within Europe, which has been enormous economic benefit across the European Union, but has become very politically contentious in recent years, and particularly governments who would like to see the protections for workers slightly diminished in many of those countries. And I think it's important to understand how regional mobility can play a great role in improving protections for workers overseas. And with that, I would like to move to Mr. Huverthi, who is the Undersecretary of State in the Ministry of Labour and Vocational Training in Cambodia. And perhaps you could speak a little to your experiences of Cambodia as a sending country regionally of migrants overseas, what steps you've taken to protect workers overseas, and your experiences of working within the ASEAN framework to think about the protection of workers.
Thank you very much for Auditor for giving me the talk about the experience in Cambodia about the protection of the migrant workers. First of all, I would like to present some thought the migration in Cambodia. The migration management in Cambodia just began in 1995. So far, we have never experienced in the migration management. But after the Civil War, when we realized many people are unemployed, and also the people have never underemployed. So we try to take all measures to provide the people with employment, especially employment outside the country, because in the country there is not enough employment for the people. In recent years, cross-border migration growing rapidly, especially from Cambodia to Thailand and Malaysia, and some also other countries. Through almost one decade, labor migration government have become very important to be included in the national agenda, while the government also observed that many difficulties have been faced by migrant workers during the migration process. Government also bear in mind that respect human rights and labor rights shall be a solid ground for a fair migration agenda. Therefore, the government must take appropriate measures to make new national regulation meeting all observed requirements to ensure the effectiveness of protection and promotion and rights of migrant workers. Responding to this spirit, my government cooperates with the employer association, with the worker unions, and also civil society and other international cooperation. We make the national regulation to govern the management of the migrant workers from Cambodia to neighboring countries. The most important tool that we already developed is the policy for employment for labor migration for Cambodia, and also the safe migration for premature orientations. Based to these two important tools, we developed the sub-decree concerning the management of sending migrant workers to work abroad. This is our experience. In managing Cambodian migrant workers to work abroad, especially Thailand and Malaysia, Cambodia has cooperated closely with the government of Thailand and Malaysia. We, based on the international instruments and also national instruments, we both, as the sending country and the receiving country, we established the MOU between the two countries concerning the management of the worker from Cambodia to work in Malaysia and Thailand. Besides this, we also implement the regional instrument in ASEAN. The regional instrument in ASEAN is the Declaration of ASEAN on the protection and the promotion of the right of migrant workers that established in Cebu, Manila in 2007. In accordance with this declaration, the Minister of Labour of ASEAN has established the working group of ASEAN. For example, the working group to establish the instrument to implement this declaration. But right now, the declaration have not finished yet. Maybe the draft will be finalized at the end this year in Laos, PDR. This is the cooperation of for the management of the labor migration in Cambodia, not in only between the country and country, but we cooperate also with the international cooperation, international organizations such as International Labor Organization, and International Organization for Migrations. With the two international organizations, we cooperate with these organizations and to establish the instruments of the Cambodia. We call it the sub-decree, and also we also establish the ministerial order, some ministerial orders to support the provision of the sub-decree of the national sub-decrees, in order that the implementation of the national sub-decrees is really efficient. And we have concluded also that the labor migration management success cannot be separated from the good coordination among national institutions concerned, and also cannot separate from the cooperation with the development partner, and also we cannot separate from the good cooperation with the regional and international organizations and communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention, which I think sets out the complexity of this issue and the number of different interlocutors that you potentially can interact with as the Minister for Labour. And if I can turn now to Mr. Luis Ernesto Carles Rudy, who is the Minister for Work and Labour Development in Panama. Panama is a country that's experienced strong economic growth in recent years, which typically comes accompanied by strong labour migration flows. And so what kinds of cooperation have you invested in order to improve the flow and management of that labour migration? Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, señora Colette. No, definitivamente nosotros tenemos que evaluar de una forma muy interlazada cómo surgen estos fenómenos de migración. Y lo más importante que sucede en las Américas es que la migración no proviene precisamente de conflictos políticos o conflictos bélicos, sino que principalmente incide en cómo está nuestro mercado laboral, producto de un crecimiento económico sostenible que sucede en muchos de nuestros países, en esa diversidad de aplicación de competencias técnicas, que es la búsqueda del talento humano necesario para una necesidad en específico que la demanda laboral exige en cada país, y en otras ocasiones por la ausencia de oportunidades de empleo que suceden producto de algún desastre que haya sucedido en el país, como puede ser algún desastre climático o algún problema de inseguridad. Entonces, en las Américas quizás hemos roto el paradigma de que ya las migraciones laborales no solamente son del sur hacia el norte, sino que ahora las migraciones son del sur al norte, del norte al sur, al este, al oeste. Hoy peruanos, bolivianos y uruguayos viajan a Argentina, a Chile, colombianos o costarricenses, nicaragüenses viajan a Panamá, otros viajarán a Estados Unidos, pero es una convergencia muy interesante que nos posiciona como Américas, como países de América en la búsqueda de esa solidaridad permanente y en donde la migración laboral no es un fenómeno a futuro, sino que es un fenómeno real, que no es que nos esté afectando, sino que más bien es una riqueza que puede potenciar el intercambio cultural, económico, de habilidades, de destrezas que pueden tener los diferentes trabajadores migrantes. Yo estoy convencido que la cooperación institucional se hace urgente y que la búsqueda de una política integral de migración laboral es muy importante que se dé en América. Y yo creo que debe de llevarnos a los siguientes componentes. Primero, que exista una comunicación permanente con todos los ministros de trabajo de las Américas, que pueda trascender más allá de la seguridad de nuestras fronteras y sobre todo que se pueda salvaguardar los derechos de los trabajadores migrantes. Y en ese derecho de los trabajadores migrantes guarda una importancia recomendación, la suscripción de los gobiernos del Acuerdo de Trabajo Decente, porque enfoca sobre todo los 4 componentes y me refiero quizás al principal en cuanto a la protección social, que puede ser un aspecto que los trabajadores migrantes cuando ingresen a nuestros países no tengan este aspecto que a través de una suscripción regional o una política regional podríamos satisfacer. Otro segundo elemento, creo que es importante armonizar los sistemas de migración laboral. Por ejemplo, está el grupo andino, el grupo del Mercosur, nosotros en Centroamérica tenemos el SICA y auguro a que pueda haber una participación tripartita, trabajadores, empleadores, el sector gobierno y que podamos crear o propongo una gran conferencia regional de migrantes trabajadores. Creo que eso sería una iniciativa muy importante a nivel regional. Otro componente que es muy importante que conozcamos las necesidades laborales, por ejemplo, entre Costa Rica y Panamá intercambiamos mucha información de cuál es nuestra demanda laboral y cuáles son nuestras necesidades técnicas de acuerdo a la oferta de formación que puede ofrecer cada país. Un ejemplo muy particular, la ampliación del Canal de Panamá, que está en su fase final, contrató a más de 7,000 trabajadores. El 28% fueron trabajadores migrantes y como país nos preparamos en ese momento para adecuar nuestra legislación a poder tener estos trabajadores migrantes con un derecho genuino, con un trabajo decente y con todos los elementos que incluye la seguridad social. Y otro elemento muy importante es la creación de una política de migración equitativa que yo creo que OIT nos demuestra una vez más que no solo contribuimos en ideas, sino que OIT nos contribuye en cosas muy prácticas, como es el ejemplo de Costa Rica, que han establecido una política de migración equitativa. Nosotros en Panamá también estamos en búsqueda de fortalecer, y como bien lo dijo nuestro director general sobre migración equitativa, es importante que nuestros gobiernos entiendan que la migración laboral es un derecho social y eso debe de plasmarse a través de instrumentos de gobernanza. O sea, no vamos a avanzar si a través de nuestros países no logramos instrumentalizar todas estas legislaciones a fin de que podamos darle una mejor garantía a nuestros trabajadores migrantes. El artículo 2 del Código de Trabajo de Panamá establece el principio de la territorialidad laboral y eso es muy importante porque le permite al trabajador migrante igual trato de la legislación laboral respecto a los demás trabajadores. Y en alguna de las jurisprudencias en las Américas ya se ha evaluado sobre todo el tema del pago de los derechos adquiridos y la seguridad social de los trabajadores, también contemplarla en una legislación. Yo estoy convencido, y como bien lo señaló nuestro director general en la memoria del 2014, cito, la migración equitativa se sustenta en valores universales de la igualdad de trato y la no discriminación, como recibir una remuneración en condición de igualdad por un trabajo de igual valor y ejercer sus derechos fundamentales, incluidos los atinentes a la libertad sindical. Entonces yo creo que esto es muy fundamental que lo entiendan nuestros gobiernos en la búsqueda de que la migración debe ser equitativa y debe ser justa. Yo creo que también debemos de involucrar transferencia de los servicios públicos de empleo, debe de haber una información y combatir la precarización del trabajo de las personas migrantes. Cuando en nuestros países no existen sistemas de inspectoría o no fortalecemos los sistemas de inspectoría, entonces se da mucho a que los trabajadores migrantes tiendan a que se les dé un trabajo informal. Y el trabajo informal no reconoce el derecho a la seguridad social. Termino diciendo que un migrante que busca un empleo fuera de sus fronteras no debe hacerlo por su necesidad, sino como una opción de empleabilidad donde estén consagrados los componentes del trabajo decente.
Thank you very much. And I think that raises a very important point, which is in order to collaborate regionally and in order to realize the benefits of labor migration, you need not just strong and transparent and comprehensive immigration systems, but strong and transparent and comprehensive labor market institutions that can manage labor not just for nationals, but for the entire workforce. And with that, I'd like to turn to Mr. Lamati, who is the Director General of Inspections and Enforcement Service within the Department of Labor in South Africa. Now, South Africa is a key receiving country within the Southern African region and a key actor in the Southern African development cooperation. So what kinds of regional and national collaboration do you envisage and you think are necessary within your region in order to realize the benefits of labor migration?
Thank you, Ms. Collett. As we have rightly pointed out, as mostly a receiving country, it's important for us to work closely with the countries of origin, firstly. But we do that through the ambit of the South African Development Cooperation and the AU. Fortunately for our region, the heads of states of the of SADC mostly, they put together a protocol document on labor and employment, which in a way is instructive to the countries that when they develop the labor migration policies, they must take into account a number of issues. One, the harmonization of labor migration policies, and secondly, the issue relating to the portability of qualifications and the recognition of those qualifications in the different countries. So what we have done as a country is in realizing the fact that in growing our economy, we require certain skills that as a country we do not have. And we can import those skills. And therefore, when we develop what we call the Accelerated Shared and Growth Initiative for South Africa, which is a policy which would like us to grow our economy, continuously. We then put an element there which says we recognize the role that can be played by the by migrant workers, and therefore, when we wrote the immigration policy, we made it possible that we can develop a list of scarce and critical skills. And on an annual basis, we then update that list, and people then have a right to apply and we adjudicate that. And the way we do it, even though migration is a competency of a department called Home Affairs in our country, the Department of Labor and the Department of Trade and Industry are a key player in deciding as to whether the application is successful or not. the way we do it, because as a Department of Labor, our responsibility is to make sure that every employee in the country receives the protection, is covered by the labor laws that we have, and therefore receives the legal protection. So when there's an application, we go to a company that has applied for a permit quota, and we go and do inspections, because we need to make sure that this company complies with the law. And we also need to make sure that we do salary benchmarkings, so that the migrant workers that are coming are not going to be given a salary that is far below than what is prescribed for that specific sector. So that's what we do. The other aspect is the Home Affairs Department has an immigration board, and that immigration board has representative from the different social partners, organized labor, business. But what we've done is we've added an element of community, because as both the DG and the Minister of Labor from Italy have stated clearly that often you have the problem of the integration of the migrant workers in the society. So we brought in that element so that the leaders in the community can be the ones who advocate the integration of the migrant workers. And I mean, in the past, we've had serious problems with regards to the acceptance of the migrant workers by the communities. But the other element that we've done in order to not to create problems between the community and the migrant workers is that we identified those skills that we think are required, and those skills that we think we can import, and those that we think we have in abundance in the country, and therefore those skills and those jobs can then be filled by the locals. It doesn't really sometimes work that way. So that is why it is important that you have a close network of structures that can deal with all sorts of problems. You have to work with the police. You have to work with immigration officials, and so that whatever problems that you have there, you are able to nip that problem in the bud. But most importantly is what we've done as a country is we have signed bilateral agreements with a different number of countries just to make sure that we exchange policy views and also practicalities in terms of how we deal with issues of migration, but also in keeping with the SADC labor migration policy, which advocate the development and the harmonization of policies. We enter that into our bilateral agreements so that what we have in South Africa is also it also prevails in the country of the origin. But also, what is important for us is that we also extend the social protection, to migrant workers, which is part of the labor market policies that we have in South Africa. So I think that's how, as a country, deal with the issue of labor migration. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that demonstrates quite a comprehensive response, and I'm particularly heartened to hear that there is good cooperation between the Ministry of Labour and the Ministry of Home Affairs. I come from the European context, and quite often I hear the complaints and sadness of officials working in labour ministries that their voices aren't heard when it comes to the migration debate, and their views are not incorporated when people are thinking about the redesign of immigration policies, which ultimately they have to deal with. They are the ones who will be making sure that those are successful in the long term. And I'd like to turn to Ronnie Goldberg, who is the Executive Vice President and Senior Policy Officer of the United States Council for International Business. Clearly, labour migration is of deep strategic interest for businesses across the globe. But what can employers do in terms of developing sort of collaboration with governments and thinking about these issues at national level, regional, international level? And is that type of cooperation limited just to the entry, residence and selection of migrant workers? What do businesses involve themselves in post-entry? What sort of integration and qualifications recognition and those sorts of success promotion can employers get themselves involved in?
Well, I'm not sure I can get to all of that in my 3 minutes, but I'll do my best to get to most of it. Thanks very much, and it's a pleasure to be here representing the International Organization of Employers in this debate. The case for why why enterprises should be interested in migration has already been made very well here in the panel, so I won't belabor that. But perhaps it's not so obvious why business should be at the table and what we can bring to the table. Companies are grand resources because of their practical knowledge of the workings of immigration laws and procedures, their valuable knowledge of markets and staffing trends, and their ability to provide practice-based advice to assist governments to clarify and improve their regulatory regimes. This is why we're so delighted that migration has, as a policy issue, has risen on the agenda of the ILO to the extent that it has, and why we so welcome the role of the ILO and the DG in the global migration group at the UN, or in the UN system, because this multiplies the number of channels and opportunities we have to come to the table. And if we don't have at least a seat at the table, at least we have a chair in the room and can offer our perspectives and our practical expertise. Now, labor market needs, obviously, for migrants, obviously vary enormously across sectors, across industries, and so on. We've heard some of that reflected in the panel just now. But it's in the interest of all employers, all responsible employers, wherever they do business, wherever the need for migrant labor exists in their organizations. It's in all their interests to have clear, transparent, and efficient national immigration laws and policies that will permit them to move employees where and when they are needed. And it is further in our interest, to the extent possible, that these national laws be harmonized across borders. Employers doing business in more than one country, and by the way, that doesn't mean just a handful of enormous multinationals. That means millions of enterprises all around the world, enterprises of all sizes, suffer from a lack of international harmonization of immigration terms and conditions. Sometimes it's even from a lack of harmonization of definitions. Employers often find themselves caught between disparities between the rules and regulations and requirements of the sending country and the receiving country. Sometimes they find themselves operating in vacuums. For example, in jurisdictions where particular issues are not addressed, where the regulations are silent, or just as badly, where regulations are poorly understood or not enforced, and so they might as well be absent. So it's in all of our interest to work at the national level to have regulatory regimes which are fit for purpose and comprehensive, and to try to work in every arena and every organization that's open to us to affect the kind of harmonization I mentioned a moment ago. This is important to companies because it touches their competitiveness, their productivity, and their efficiency, but it's equally essential to realizing the societal objectives of immigration that we've heard about, and to ensuring the protection of workers. We operate at all levels of the migration world, I think. Different types of employment create different situations. So we might be talking about the movement of highly skilled personnel, and we might be talking about situations such as the one described by the minister from Panama, where the issue is large-scale recruitment of sometimes unskilled labor or less skilled labor. And this touches on the remark, I think, made by the minister from Italy on understanding the reasons that people migrate. Is it for choice? Is it because they've been headhunted? Is it for economic necessity? So we need a way of addressing all these various forms, but hopefully in a comprehensive and coordinated way.
Thank you very much, and I think it's a useful perspective to think about it comprehensively as well. This is not just a recruitment issue, this is much more broad, and the social impacts are as important as the rest. And with that, I'd like to turn to our final panelist in this esteemed group, Ms. Binda Pandey, who's the Governing Council member of the General Federation of Nepalese Trade Unions. And I'd like to ask you to sort of elaborate a little on why such cooperation across countries and within countries is necessary for the protection of workers. And beyond the sort of political agreement to think about protection of workers, how can trade unions help in terms of protecting workers on the ground on a day-to-day basis? What kinds of initiatives across countries can trade unions consider?
Thank you very much, distinguished panelists and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Very good afternoon. First of all, let me thanks inviting me this very important panel, and I welcome and acknowledge the leading role played by the DG of the ILO in this regards. As we all know, migration today is the key to the viability of the labor market worldwide, and governing migration must be about protection of the people, about decent work for all, and about justice for working people. The trade union movement has for some times been advocating and migration debates, policy, and agreement need to be firmly rooted in the international normative human rights and the workers' right framework. Labor mobility agreements are increasingly being negotiated bilaterally and regionally, and they often ignore the normative framework and facilitate the discrimination and abuse of the rights of the workers, migrant workers, and government often fail to consult with the social partners. And many of the panelists has already mentioned about the multilateral and cross-national participation to protect the migrants' right. In this situation, let me touch upon some of the points from the workers' point of view, because now the almost 3% of the old population, they are working as a identity of the migrant in the world. First of all, the international human and labor right framework governing the migration must underpin the bilateral and regional negotiation on labor mobility. And the second, both countries of destination and the origin must ratify ILO Convention. Basically, we just, the highlight ILO Convention on 97-143, Domestic Convention 189, and this Forced Labor Convention 29, including this, the protocol. These are the very important. And then regarding the family of the workers and the migrant workers, both it is very important, this the UN Convention 1990 as well, and those things, it has to be reflected in the national laws, and it has to be reflected in the regional economic community as well. Another is very important things, the trade union is always raising that the equal treatment needs to be guaranteed, as well as the right to freedom of association and the collective bargaining for the migrant workers, which is very crucial. And then most of the migrant workers, especially from my region, they are not having to exercise all these things. It is crucial for the social partners to be present and engage in this bilateral and regional negotiation through formal social dialogue and national tripartite consultation process. And basically from my region, the trade union, they are not being the part of this national, making the national policy and the plan regarding the migrant workers. And the labor inspection covering the migrant workers must be reinforced in line with the ILO Convention 81. And the inspectorate must be better trained in the detection of the forced labor. It is very much the issue of regarding the labor law. And then those inspectorate should be able to communicate in the language spoken by the migrant workers. And the migrant workers also must have the access to effective complaint mechanism in their own language. Because of the language barrier, it is not being possible to make a complaint. And another is this, the primary responsibility of the governance and the administration of the labor law, migration plan and policy. It should be shifted to the labor ministry from the interior or the home affairs of the ministry. And adopting the measures to extend the social security coverage and the portability to migrant workers in both origin and destination countries. This should be supported by the wider ratification of the ILO Convention 102 and the security and the recommendation and the recommendation 202 on the social protection floor. And finally, we as trade union in the region of destination and the origin need to cooperate to the protection of the migrant workers. And in our region, actually, we are in those countries where we have functional trade union and trade union from the country of the origin and the country of the destination, we are cooperating. And in those countries where we are being able to cooperate a little bit, the migrant workers, their right have been little bit protected, or at least that they can go to the trade union office in the country of the destination, and then they can get some help. But many of the countries, they don't have even the trade union, and then they have no place to go, and it is very crucial. So in this regards, maybe when we talk about this, the multilateral and the bilateral agreement, the participation of the tripartite, and it is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, now we've heard from all of our panelists, we come to the more fun, interactive part of the session. We have just under half an hour and probably about 20 minutes to take questions from the floor. If I can ask you to clearly introduce yourself and your institution, ask concise, directed questions, and please direct them to a specific member of the panel if at all possible. I'll be calling on just one person to respond to each question. So if I can open the floor, and we'll gather a couple of questions for our panel. Does anyone want to ask a question? You really are leaving it open to me to ask any question I want, which is a bad idea. Anyone?
Thank you very much. Let me first of all, my name is Ali Ismail from Kenya. I work in the Ministry of Labor in Kenya as a permanent secretary. Now, Kenya is a net exporter, or is a source country for labor migration, especially to the Gulf. And we do have a number of challenges, but we also have found we have found opportunities. I think, Mr. Chairman, it's only fair to say that looking at the history of many countries across the world, some of the leading countries today have been founded on labor migration. People searching for new opportunities, people who are running away from problems at home, then who have found opportunities in those countries of destination. So in the context of Kenya, we have found that remittances by people who migrate have actually grown quite substantially, as a country. But in the process, a lot of challenges abound, and we have come across a lot of violations of workers' rights, particularly in the Gulf region. So my question, well, I have one question, and I wanted to share the experience of Nepal, because I know Nepal is a country that sends quite a substantial number of workers to the Gulf particularly. And my question is with regard to, okay, there are some problems that occur within the country, which is the source for labor migration, and you can deal with those problems internally. These problems include problems such as regulating private employment agencies and making sure that from the source country, you are able to actually make them operate within the law. But there are certain things that happen to migrant workers once they get to country of destination. And this is where we needed to share your experience as to how you have been able to deal with, because we have had labor migration, and I think this is bilateral agreements, and this is an area where we can see that ILO perhaps can give us a lot of support. But even with those bilateral agreements, we still realize that there are problems that occur within the borders of the destination countries. And this is where oftentimes we find several Kenyans who are actually distressed, and the government is forced to come in order to save them from that situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we could gather one or two more questions. Has anyone else got a burning question? No? Everyone's very quiet. You've not had enough lunch. Okay, well then in that case, perhaps I could ask Ms. Pandey to respond, and also perhaps Minister Vudthi, you could offer a response based on the experience of the Cambodian tripartite dialogue as well, perhaps Ms. Pandey, and then...
Yeah, actually thank you very much for this question. Yeah, in the Gulf country, it is the most big problem we are facing, and then if I share the experiences from the Nepal, actually for last 200 years, we are having this problem of having the migration in the other country. And right now also some 15% of the total population, they are working in the, the out of the country. And, but as a trade union, we feel always this, it is also our responsibility to protect, the right who are working out of the country. So since last almost 15 years, we are organizing migrant workers in different countries as a support group, because I'm representing the trade union called the G Fund, and then in the different country we have formed the G Fund support group, and they can be just a supporter, and then if there is any trade union in the local in the destination country, and then we just link them up with the local union, and then we have made some of the the MOU also with the local union, like in Malaysia and even in the Gulf, in the Kuwait and the Bahrain. We have made the bilateral MOU between the two unions, and then if there is any problem, and they can contact sometimes back to the home, and then we can refer those cases to the local union also, and then the local union, they help. And sometimes even just to going to the workplace, and then in the residential area, and just the looking around by the local union means the trade union leaders, that also make much difference, because that is the experiences from our people there. So in other countries also, like Korea, we have also organization called the Migrant Trade Union, and then all the migrants workers, they are being organized under that trade union, and then KCTU, they are allocating some of the, even the space to have meeting there. And in the different countries, yeah, we have that kinds of experiences. And then right now in the back home, what we are discussing that we don't have the tripartite consultation regarding the policy and the law formulation regarding migrant workers, and we are demanding that to our government. At least there should be the tripartite consultation and tripartite participation to formulate the law and the policy. Yeah, still many things it is dealt by our foreign ministry, and then that is also we are asking to move all those things to the labor ministry. So we are just taking in those kinds of initiatives back home as well as in the destination country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much for the question. I would like to brief only about the problem occurred in the receiving countries. So far, more than 1 decade, the Cambodian has experienced a lot about the problem occurred and faced to the migrant worker in receiving country, especially some countries already sent, except some country like the Korea, there is no many problems. But some other countries, like we send some skilled workers to Thailand and Malaysia, many problems. But we need our structural and mechanism and our legislation to protect them. The first of all is the bilateral agreement under different aspects that we sign with the country or receiving countries. And for the protection, we prepare the worker before we send abroad. Before we send abroad, we need to inspect the work site, and also we need to prepare the pre-departure orientation and also the document in order that the worker that have enough document to work in the receiving countries. And also we have our embassy in the receiving countries. In the embassy, we have the first or second consular of the embassy that in charge of the labor protection at the receiving countries, in cooperating with the representative of the private recruitment agencies. We talk about the private recruitment agency. We have two kinds of private recruitment agencies, both in the Cambodian private recruitment agencies that responsible before the government of Cambodia, and the second one is a private recruitment agency in the receiving countries that respond before the government of the receiving countries. Both the receiving countries need both private recruitment agencies need to cooperate to each other to protect the workers, Cambodian workers already sent to the countries while they are working until they finish the contract and repatriated to Cambodia. And also the government of Cambodia have also the interministerial working group to monitor the Cambodian worker work in the receiving countries. This monitoring working group have established include with the staff of Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Interior, and also Ministry of Foreign Affairs, especially the people work in the embassy of Cambodia in the receiving countries. This is the brief what the measure that the Cambodian have protect our Cambodian worker in receiving countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any additional questions from the floor? Oh, see, now everyone's waking up. Now we're running out of time. If I can take a question from the back there and a question here. Sir?
Good afternoon. I'm from Bangladesh, and I don't have a question as such, but more of an observation or a comment. You see, a very large number of migrant workers are sent from Bangladesh to the Middle East, to the Far East, and many other countries. One of the problems that we faced a few years ago was in Malaysia, where the Minister for Human Resources told me in very clear terms that we have thousands of workers from your country, but the problem is after every 2 years they become illegal. So I asked why, and he said that the reason is the cost of migration is so high that they require at least 4 years of work in order to recoup the amount of money that they have spent. And this is a huge problem. And I'm not sure how it can be addressed, but it does need to be addressed, this cost of migration. Thank you very much.
Okay, if we can gather 2 more questions from here, and then I'll ask some of our panelists to respond.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Plamen Dimitrov. I'm president of the largest trade union confederation in Bulgaria. So I have 2 questions, one to the distinguished ministers and representatives of the governments, and one to the Director General. The first was the national government representatives. The question is who is sending and who is responsible for the rights of migrants, in the both sending and receiving countries. So how the national policies respect or consider intermediary labor brokers, temporary agency work, how actually the governments, both in sending and receiving countries, which are in the panel, are dealing with this issue, and how we think that it's possible to improve the relationships with these very important players in international migration to protect workers' rights while sending and receiving migrant workers. And the second question to the Director General is actually related to the relationship between the International Labour Organization and International Organization for Migration. I know that the dialogue was established, but it seems to me good to elaborate a little bit more after the report DG made during the last international conference. And also the second question to him, how ILO is helping to the sending more to the more sending countries, especially in the Southeast Asia, as was written here, that is the most intensive migration flow, but also in Africa, helping the governments to implement or to develop and implement integrated national strategy, pro-employment, and to create jobs from the sending countries, which are enough attractive to the workers to be there, not to migrate, especially involuntary, which is the most of the cases. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Frederick Muya. I'm Senior Advisor, International Organization of Employers. I just had a question with regard to what the DG said in his opening remarks, that migration is a very toxic issue. Actually, for politicians, if you want to win an election, you've got to be careful what you say when it comes to migration. And it did indicate that we are increasingly seeing free movement of people, even across Europe, being questioned. The question is, how do we address very pressing issues such as aging populations, lack of skills in certain sectors, in a how can I say, in a dispassionate way, in a way that enables people to look for solutions, win-win solutions. And to the ministers in the room, do you think working very closely with employers, as Ronnie said, who are aware of the labor market needs in the sectors, and also with trade unions, it can help you address at national level some of those issues that you are sort of afraid not to take on because of an election is around the corner? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And speaking as a British national, I know exactly how perverse the political debates on migration can become if there isn't strong leadership on issues of what's actually necessary within a migration system. I could lose my citizenship for that, but I don't really care at this point. I can become Belgian. I would like to move this way across the panel and ask each of our three, Ms. Goldberg, Mr. Lamati, and Mr. Carlos Rude, if they could speak to this final round of questions, and particularly Ms. Goldberg, if you could sort of speak about the cost of recruitment and how employers might sort of reduce the costs of mobility to allow workers to become more flexible. First, and then we can move to our other panelists.
Well, at one end of the spectrum, the thing that would, I think, best decrease the cost of recruitment would be a decrease in the degree and the lack of coherence of regulatory systems. Employers spend millions upon millions of dollars every year just trying to move their own employees around the world, let alone recruit other employees. So that's one thing. At the other end of the spectrum, in terms of, well, let me talk about remittances for a second. I think the World Bank is doing a great deal of work on how to reduce the cost of remittances, and that's work certainly that the employers support. With respect to international recruitment services, I think there's a list of best practices or good practices that's not very controversial. Everybody can agree on what kind of recruitment services, what kind of conditions, what kind of information should be made available to migrant workers, what their conditions should be when they get to their place of work. The problem is there are a lot of bad actors in the system. So whatever we can do to help the good actors, the reputable recruiters, the end employers who often don't even know what promises have been made, what money has been extorted inappropriately, and so on. The more we can do in that regard, the better off we are. And that sort of touches on the question about the IOM as well. Both the IOM and the ILO are working in this field of fair recruitment or ethical recruitment. There are some different initiatives out there. There's not going to be a magic bullet. There's not going to be one magic set of rules or one magic initiative that solves this enormous problem. The best we can do is work through every channel we can to address the problem.
Thank you very much. To just talk about the protection of workers and to speak to several of our panelists about how they can think about the protection of workers who arrive in their countries. One of the things that occurs to me is information is power. If you understand your rights and you know how to enforce your rights, then that's half the battle. But Mr. Lambati, from the perspective of South Africa, what steps have you taken to ensure that the rights of migrant workers are protected, and how closely do you bring in the social partners to achieve that goal?
Thank you. I think one of the things that we did in South Africa was not to, in our definition of what an employee is, was not to put any exclusions. So if you're an employee, as in South Africa, you are covered, by all the labor market legislations that we have. But secondly, as a department, we took a conscious decision that, as you have put it nicely, information is power. So on a regular basis, we run a series of seminars, and we invite different stakeholders so that we educate them on their responsibilities and so that they know their rights. So we do that, and when we have those seminars, in some instances we do them in collaboration with employers, because it's important that employers are part of the equation. And we also involve the so-called labor brokers as well, because they are the part of the puzzle. And we have made serious amendments to the number of legislations in our country to deal effectively with issues relating to labor broking. Whilst we appreciate the role that labor broking is playing, we also have a number of problems that especially organized labor have raised, which as inspectorate we have witnessed. And therefore, in the amendments that we have proposed, we are saying they have a right to exist, but their existence is only limited to providing the employer with people. And once those people are received by the client, it therefore becomes the responsibility of the client to assume the role of an employer. So those are some of the changes that we've made in the legislation to make sure that not only migrant workers, but just generally workers are protected. I think, let me just go back to the question that was raised with regards to how do you make sure that both the receiving and the sending country have labor market policies that protect the workers. I think earlier on I stated the fact that it's important that we have bilateral agreements, and in those bilateral agreements, I think we need to put provisions that will enable both countries to see to it that there's harmonization of the policies, because it doesn't help that in our country, we have a minimum wage in a specific sector. And you have an employee that comes from another country who says, I'm prepared to take whatever you're offering. I think those are some of the problems that we were experiencing, especially in the farming sector. But we're working with the employers in the farming sector. We're working with the sending countries as well. Yes, that's very, very important. Yes.
Mr. Kalasfudi, perhaps I can ask the same question to you. What kind of steps are you taking to promote the protection of migrant workers within the broader labor market?
Bueno, es importante, retomo algo que decía el representante de Kenia. Al final nuestras naciones han sido establecidas por migrantes. Entonces, partiendo de allí, deberíamos de ver el tema de migración como un tema que nos debe de interesar a todos sin necesidad de tener ningún prejuicio. Es difícil, ¿no? Pero lo podemos hacer. Entonces creo que debemos de promover iniciativas de legalizar a los trabajadores migrantes. Eso es muy fundamental. En nuestro país establecimos un mecanismo de crisol de razas, porque al final, teniendo al trabajador legalizado, omites la posibilidad de que tengas un trabajador que esté pagando alguna comisión o que esté siendo objeto de algún mal, no trato decente, de un empleo decente. De igual forma es importante sancionar al empleador que no legaliza a su trabajador. En muchas áreas de las Américas esto es lo que se hace, no es sancionar al trabajador migrante, sino sancionar al empleador que no legaliza a su trabajador. Y creo que debe de haber un sistema de inspección integral. Debemos de cuidar que se pague el salario justo en igualdad de trato del trabajador nacional con el trabajador migrante, ver que pueda ejercer una competencia de un trabajo digno y sobre todo ver la protección social. Por ejemplo, los países que no han suscrito el convenio 189 que tiene que ver sobre trabajadoras y trabajadores del hogar, esta es una competencia que en muchos países de América tiende a hacer un trabajo informal y no reconocerle la seguridad social. Yo creo que, como decía la señora Goldberg, lo que tenemos que ver es los malos mediadores que a veces hay o los malos interlocutores. Yo creo que definitivamente concienciar la formalidad del empleo de los empleadores en nuestros países es fundamental. No podemos tener empleadores informales porque precisamente existirán entonces trabajadores migrantes informales.
Thank you. We're quickly running out of time this afternoon, but I would like to offer the final word to Minister Paoletti and Director General Ryder. Having listened to this discussion and listened to the different perspectives on the panel, what are your final thoughts and where do you think we'll go in the future?
Ma io credo che noi dobbiamo essere consapevoli che il tema delle migrazioni è un tema che nel tempo diventerà sempre più forte, perché le tensioni, le difficoltà, le diseguaglianze porteranno molti cittadini a cercare una risposta alla loro condizione di difficoltà e quindi noi dobbiamo pensare che il tema delle migrazioni è un tema in primo luogo di libertà, perché noi pensiamo che ogni essere umano debba essere libero di potersi muovere. Poi sappiamo che questo tema di libertà deve fare i conti con le regole, con le leggi, con le compatibilità, con le possibilità, con il rispetto delle libertà degli altri. Quindi dobbiamo gestire, governare un processo molto difficile e bisogna capirlo a partire dalle ragioni per le quali una persona decide di spostarsi, perché posso fare un esempio: chi decide di chiedere asilo perché viene da un paese che è in guerra probabilmente non parte dal bisogno del lavoro, parte da un altro tipo di esigenza e magari pensa di poter tornare il prima possibile nel proprio paese. Chi invece si muove per una ragione economica o per una ragione di lavoro parte dall'idea di potersi stabilizzare o stabilire in maniera definitiva in un altro paese. Queste situazioni vanno trattate in maniera diversa, ma noi non possiamo neppure pensare che una persona che chiede asilo possa stare senza lavoro perché ha un problema di di vivere di sua piena dignità. Quindi anche quando siamo di fronte ad una tematica del tutto particolare, che è quella dell'asilo, abbiamo anche lì il problema del lavoro in forma diversa, ma il problema del lavoro come condizione della dignità di quella persona, che non può stare senza fare nulla per un lungo arco della propria vita aspettando che accada qualcosa. Quindi noi abbiamo questa grande situazione. Qui c'è bisogno, io direi in questo modo, di molta politica, di molte relazioni tra lo Stato, le istituzioni, le diverse istituzioni a livello mondiale, e c'è bisogno di una grande capacità di lavoro con le organizzazioni sociali. L'esperienza del nostro Paese ci dice che molti migranti tendono a ricostituire le loro comunità etniche, tendono a stare a vivere insieme, ma questo fatto ha un elemento di positività e uno di problematicità. Quello positivo è che quelle comunità fanno vivere la loro cultura, la loro storia e mantengono un collegamento col loro paese. Ma se queste comunità si chiudono, tendono a separarsi dalle comunità locali e vengono vissute dalle comunità locali come un elemento di pericolo, come qualcosa che non si conosce, che agisce in contrapposizione all'interesse di quella comunità. Quindi noi dobbiamo sapere che da questo punto di vista abbiamo bisogno di mediatori culturali, mediatori sociali, di strumenti che ci consentano di far partecipare queste comunità alla vita del paese e della comunità nella quale sono ospitati. È un lavoro molto difficile, ma credo che non ci sia una soluzione semplice a questo grande problema. Bisogna avere chiaramente un'idea. Il lavoro è la prima condizione di integrazione, quindi noi dobbiamo sapere che in ogni presenza di migrazione la prima questione che si pone è come questa migrazione sta in connessione con il lavoro, perché è lì che si verifica il primo punto di criticità. Naturalmente credo che bisogna essere molto rigidi nel combattere tutti i fenomeni di sfruttamento, tutti quegli elementi che approfittano del fatto che mediamente un cittadino che migra in molti casi è un cittadino debole, è un cittadino in grande difficoltà, è un cittadino che è facilmente assoggettabili ad elementi di sfruttamento e quindi ha bisogno di una tutela particolarmente rilevante.
Thank you very much, and can I just say it's inspiring to hear a minister who is willing to unpack the complexity of migration and its relationship to the labour market, and also someone who doesn't want to shy away from that and not afraid of that complexity, but rather welcome it and understand it and respond more effectively. And with that in mind, I think speaking of the complexity, I mean, we've heard the local, the national, the regional and the international aspects of the management of labour migration. And I guess the final question to you, Director General, is really how can the ILO bring this together and really create a more coherent and comprehensive approach to this issue in the future?
Well, I think there's sort of two dimensions to the answer to that question. The first is in our own work, and this is what we're setting about doing, as Ronnie Goldberg has recalled. We have to give greater prominence to work on migration. We have to address the undoubted complexities that you pointed to, and we have to give support to our constituents, be they governments, be they trade unions or employers' organisations, who are trying to address those complexities. And I think the second, and this relates to one of the questions which was put specifically to me, we have to play our role, and I think we have to raise the volume somewhat within the multilateral system to try to promote, I think, a more effective, a more rights-based approach to the management of migration. The specific point that was question that was put to me was, what about our relationship with the IOM, the International Organization on Migration? Stands out, doesn't it, as the one international organisation whose name actually includes the word migration. We're working with the IOM. I'm talking regularly with the IOM. I found those conversations actually quite fruitful. It has a particularity of not being a member of the UN system. It's a strange situation in some regards. But, you know, when I say that global migration group that we've been chairing for the last year has 18, I think, and the numbers are going up, 18 different international organisations as a member, I think you can see to some extent the challenge of bringing the multilateral system together in some sort of coherent response to the issues that we're all talking about. Just a couple of other points. Complexity of migration, the complexity of the issues. Migration is changing in form. You know, there was a generation or 2 generations ago when migration sort of meant moving for life, going from one continent to another continent, starting a new life, settler migration. That's not what it's like for the most part now. We're dealing with a multiplicity of temporary, tailored sort of processes of migration which bring out all sorts of new issues. Our colleague from Bangladesh mentioned one. You're there for 2 years, and then you're out again, or you can be out again, and you're an illegal all of a sudden. And you're maybe an illegal with a lot of debts on your hands. You're in an impossible situation, which brings me to the question of the costs of migration, and Ronnie's addressed many of those. You know, the fact of the matter is ILO standards say that fee-charging employment agencies, those who mediate in national or international migration for employment, should not charge fees to the worker. The worker shouldn't be incurring fees to migrate, but it happens. So I concur with what Ronnie said. Let's get the bad actors out of this and get some basic regulation in place. And my last comment is my first comment about the toxicity. I don't know if it's a wise word to use, it's the one that occurs to me. Toxicity, it's also difficult to say, of migration questions. If I heard one speech about we have to be fair on migration, for every 100 speeches I hear about being tough on migration, I'd be happy. I'd be very, very happy. And that's what I think our agenda on fair migration ought to aim at doing. It's not about being tough on migrants, it's about being fair to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think an excellent sentiment to finish this discussion on. Thank you all very much for attending through your lunchtime, and my thanks to the esteemed panel who I think has given us an excellent insight into the complexities of this issue and some ideas about how to move forward. Thank you very much.